Welcome to Veteran Voices. I'm your host, Jay Baker, and today I have Steve Giberson. Steve, thank you very much for joining us today.
Jay, distinct pleasure for having me. Thank you.
So, tell me about your career.
So I'm an ex-armor officer. I joined Army Cadets when I was 14. That's what got me started.
Okay, got the bug early.
Going away to summer camps seemed like a pretty good deal. I got to go to Germany for a summer when I was a cadet.
Really?
So yeah, that was really cool. So from there on, I was hooked. And I, after high school, joined the ROTP program and became an armor officer. Reported to the regiment, the Royal Canadian Dragoons in 1996 upon graduation.
So what was it like being in RMC? So that's Kingston?
Yeah.
So
I started out actually at CMR. So at the time when I enrolled in 1991, they had all three colleges going at the time. Collège Militaire Royal in Saint Jean, RMC in Kingston, and of course Royal Roads RMC in Victoria. So I went to CMR.
So. Like for the military colleges, that's a lot extra pressure than just going to college, because you're doing the Army thing as well as the college thing, right?
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, because at the time when you're young and you don't know any better, I didn't have anything to compare it to, right? And in fact, it's really funny because when I went to the recruiting center, I had no intention of going to college. I just wanted to be an Army guy. Okay. And it was actually the recruiting center that convinced me that, based on after they reviewed my high school marks, they said, we'd like to recommend you to go to university. And so after some debate with myself, I said yes to take the option, and so I went that way. And so when I got there, yeah, in terms of like the comparing to those who went to civilian university or another route, I had no idea. Like, I was just doing an Army guy thing, and yeah, it was definitely like challenging, but I was so focused on having a career in the Army that it all seemed to
just got to get through this whole university thing. To
exactly, it really was.
Get to the goal.
Look, at this point, looking back at that phase of my life, I think of like I was a horrible student. I still am today for all of the education that the Army has, either blessed or forced me to have. It was interesting. I wasn't a good student, but I was good enough because I knew I needed to pass those things. But that's how I saw them. I saw them as hurdles to getting to basically into the Army.
So you finally get through this horrible university thing and into the Dragoons.
Yep. Show up, minted, second lieutenant. I had a really great first troop. I had some outstanding NCOs and some great soldiers right out of the gate that really set the conditions for my year. I got my first operational tour in my second year at the regiment. We were involved in Bosnia at the time. Right. So I did my first tour was the S4 rotation 2 in Bosnia, and that was just following. If you kind of follow the timeline there, right after UNPRO 4, then I4 was in for a couple of rotations. So it was just following the conflict, and we were basically, just making sure that it didn't reignite, but there was a lot of still internal strife back and forth that was going on. So it was very interesting at that, young point in my career. So
what was it like on the ground in Bosnia at that time?
For a young guy who just wanted to be in the Army, it was exciting. From a personal perspective now, for someone to say, it was exciting, there was a lot of human tragedy going on. Right. Certainly my first exposure to, seeing, death and people and houses on fire and people back and forth, and there being an element of danger. For me, I was riding around in a Cougar, so I never personally felt sort of in personal danger at any given time. There were incidents when I'd be negotiating, or negotiating would be a wrong word. On for 4 days they would negotiate, but we would have meetings with belligerent leaders, in our patrol areas. So I would actually, be interacting with them. And I can remember conversations that I'd be sitting in, something like this, and there'd be, folks in tracksuits and AK-47s, laying over their laps and things like that. So, I I was confident in what we were doing and why we were doing it. And like I said, I had some of the best NCOs and soldiers that I thought, we're doing the job.
Right. Now, fast forward, I know you've done other tours.
Yes.
And what were they like comparison to your first one? Like first you were shiny and new.
Yeah.
And now
the second tour, actually, I was the squadron second in command of a squadron. So we're talking 5 years later, and I go back to the exact same camp I was in Bosnia.
Wow.
So what I really enjoyed about that tour was comparing and contrasting 5 years later.
Okay.
In my second tour was very quiet in the fact, sort of markets had returned, people were living in houses, there was an economy, and we were really full into the stabilization point. So it proved to me at that point that there was some good that was done, and the fact that the conflict had been forced to cease, and there was human progress. So that was the nice part. And then later than that, after my regimental time at the Dragoons, I then went off to CANSOFCOM, and I became a specialist in weapons of mass destruction, so chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear weapons. Okay. So it took a while to go through the training and get to operationally proficient in that domain. And then I started, sort of all my operational experience. We were primarily domestically counterterrorism focused at that time.
Okay.
And we were just building the capability to have folks integrated into overseas missions, and you would have experienced that later on. So I would have been on the front end of that while we were building that capability, and then folks deployed into the sort of the special operations task forces that would have gone later on. So great thing to do, building capacity, but my operational experience during that time, primarily domestic, but the overseas stuff was working with our international partners. So I got to travel Southeast Asia, interestingly enough.
Okay.
And that was all like very much counterterrorism focused and support to our allies in that area. But,
so now working domestically versus, overseas, does it give you a different feeling knowing that this is your home soil and these are your home people that you're dealing with? I
think to a degree it does. But I always felt that we were representing Canada, and we were protecting what Canada had at home, and and I've always said it's important for Canadians to travel, like to go other places and see, that Canada at the end of the day is a pretty good place.